In 2003, the United States military defeated an army of 370,000 soldiers in 3 weeks, using only 130,000 troops. Almost no Americans died. It seemed like the most stunning military victory in modern history. But that victory may have been the worst thing that ever happened to America, because it convinced the most powerful military on earth that it had found a magic formula, and that belief is now pushing it toward a war it cannot win. When President George W. Bush and his team decided to invade, they went to the Pentagon for a war plan. The military's experienced generals came back with a simple answer: to invade Iraq properly, you need about 1 million soldiers. Iraq had 370,000 troops at the time. The basic military rule of thumb says you need a 3-to-1 advantage to invade, hold territory, protect supply lines, and avoid encirclement. But the civilians running the Pentagon, people who had never fought in a war, rejected that plan. They had a new theory. It was called shock and awe. The idea went like this: every army is a hierarchy with a head and a body. Cut off the head, take out the command and control, and the whole body falls apart. And America had 3 tools that could do this in ways no army had ever seen before. First, total air supremacy. Second, technological omniscience, satellites, surveillance, electronic intercepts. Third, special forces who could move behind enemy lines. Together, these 3 tools would make war fast, cheap, and decisive. No need for 1 million soldiers. The generals were skeptical, but they were overruled. Then came the war, and it worked. Spectacularly, 3 weeks. The Iraqi army destroyed, American casualties so low they were almost unbelievable. There were even moments called thunder runs, where American armored vehicles simply drove through Baghdad in circles because no one could stop them. Not a tactical maneuver, just a flex. But here is what almost nobody asked afterward: why did it work so well? First, Saddam Hussein had no air defense. After the first Gulf War in 1991, he had learned he could never beat America in a straight fight, so he spent his resources suppressing internal opposition and completely ignored the threat from the air. Second, Iraq is a desert. Open, flat terrain where satellites can see everything, where special forces can drive around freely, where air power can operate without obstruction. Third surprise: no military in history had ever fought a war like this before. Saddam Hussein was so confused by the pattern of attacks that he moved his forces in the wrong direction. Baghdad was left exposed from the east. In other words, 3 unrepeatable conditions. Shock and awe had not proved itself as a new universal theory of war. It had exploited a unique set of circumstances that would never exist in quite the same way again. America did not see it that way. The success of 2003 triggered a massive shift in how the American military saw itself. Special forces grew from 38,000 to 73,000. Their budget went from $2 billion to nearly $14 billion. Shock and awe became the doctrine of the American empire. But to understand why the doctrine took hold so deeply, you have to go back even further, to Vietnam. From 1965 to 1973, America fought a war using traditional military doctrine: mass troops, hold territory, grind the enemy down. 3 million American soldiers were deployed. 58,000 died. At least 3 million Vietnamese died, most of them civilians. And America lost. What broke the war effort was not the enemy, it was the American public. The draft meant every young American had skin in the game. Journalists showed the reality of what was happening. People protested. Many in the military felt betrayed. The lesson they drew was stark. If America wants to maintain an empire, it cannot afford democracy interfering with the empire. Shock and awe was the solution. If wars are fought by small special forces using remote air power, there are no body bags coming home, no draft, no protests, no need to ask Congress for approval. The empire can operate invisibly, quietly, without the messy consent of the governed. This is what shock and awe really is. Not a theory of war, a theory of empire. A way for America to project power around the world without ever having to answer for it. But empires built on arrogance tend to have the same problems. The first problem is overcommitment. American special forces are now operating in dozens of countries simultaneously. The second problem is loss of focus. Iraq was demolished, Libya was demolished, Syria was torn apart. None of them became stable democracies. The third problem is hubris. The American Navy had 7,600 ships in 1945. Today it has 475 ships patrolling the entire world. The military has shrunk from 2 million soldiers to 1.3 million soldiers to 1.3 million. And America has lost almost all its manufacturing capacity. For every ship America builds, China builds 300. So here is the question the professor poses. If the American military has all these problems, overcommitment, no strategy, shrinking capacity, why would it agree to fight a war against Iran? The answer is that same culture of shock and awe arrogance, a generation of military leaders who grew up watching 2003 as a video game, who never experienced Vietnam. America is not heading toward disaster because its enemies are too strong. It is heading toward disaster because its own confidence has become completely untethered from reality. The people who knew what war really cost, who had watched it destroy lives at scale, built a careful, restrained doctrine of empire after World War II. The people who inherited that empire saw it as a playground. That is what hubris looks like, and history has a very consistent track record of what happened